A baby screams in the dark. You are lying on a hide mat. The fire has burned down to embers. There is no door, no wall, no ceiling between that sound and the open grassland. And out past the edge of the light, there are things that hunt by ear. And the baby will not stop. Every parent in human history has had this night. Yours had it in a room with the windows shut. Your ancestors had it under an open sky, in a world where a noise like that could be answered by something with teeth. So here is the question. Human infants are the loudest, most helpless, most conspicuous newborns of any large mammal on the planet. That should have been fatal. It wasn't. And by the end of this, you'll understand why the cry survived 100,000 years of predators, and why the room your own baby cries in is the strangest environment that cry has ever been in. Start with the man who counted. In 1969, an anthropologist named Melvin Connor moved into a cluster of village camps in northwestern Botswana and lived among the Ju Hoanzi, often called the Kungsan, who at that time were still living mainly by hunting and gathering. He stayed for 20 months, then came back for 6 more. He learned the language. And then he did something almost nobody had done before. He sat and watched babies with a stopwatch in his ear. The method was brutally simple: 15 minutes of observation at a time. An electronic beeper marked off every 5 seconds through an earpiece. Every behavior in that 5-second block got a code. He recorded more than 50 hours of infant life this way. The raw texture of babyhood in a foraging camp, second by second. 20 years later, a pediatrician named Ronald Barr took that data and asked a question that had been bothering him. In hospitals across Europe and North America, doctors had documented something they called the crying curve. A newborn cries a certain amount. That amount rises steadily, peaks somewhere around 6 weeks to 3 months, then falls away. Doctors had assumed this curve was a modern problem. Cribs, formula, schedules, strollers, parents leaving babies alone in quiet rooms. Fix the parenting, the thinking went, and the curve would flatten. Barr checked the curve against the Kalahari. It was there. Same shape. Same peak in the first 3 months. And when he compared the Kung infants to a sample of Dutch infants, the number of crying episodes was essentially identical. Those babies had never seen a crib. They were carried skin to skin in a leather sling all day and slept on their mother's mat all night. And they still cried the same number of times. But that's not the strange part. The total amount of crying was about half. Same number of outbursts, half the noise. Which means the difference was never in how often a baby decided to cry. It was in what happened next. So look at what happened next. In 2010, Ann Cale Kruger and Connor went back through those 5-second blocks and pulled out every single crying bout and every single response to it. 177 crying bouts. And what they found was a machine. 88% of crying bouts received a response from someone. The 12% that didn't were almost all short and resolved on their own within 10 seconds. Across the whole dataset, responses came at a rate of roughly 1 response for every 3 seconds of crying. Not 1 response per cry. 1 response every 3 seconds. And the babies cried, at their peak, for about 1 minute per hour. Now, that's the number everyone quotes. Here's the number nobody does. Look at who was answering. The mother alone responded to 46% of crying bouts. Someone who was not the mother responded, without her, to 28%. And in another 14%, the mother and other people responded together. Of the responses that came from someone other than the mother, 2/3 came from adult women, sisters, and other girls in the camp. Fathers accounted for 17%. Added up. For more than 4 out of 10 crying bouts, the person who dealt with it was not the mother. And the deeper you look, the stranger it gets. Across 58.5 hours of observation of babies who cried at least once, there were only 2 15-minute stretches in the entire dataset where a mother was alone with her baby. 2. In 58 hours, a crying baby in that camp was not a private problem happening to one exhausted adult in a dark room. It was a public event in a crowd, and the crowd had reflexes. There was a second layer to it too, and it ran all day. Connor and the endocrinologist Carol Worthman measured how often those infants nursed, and the answer was startling. The average gap between one nursing bout and the next was about 13 minutes, several times an hour, every waking hour, for years. The babies also nursed at night, lying on the same mat, often without fully waking anyone. So put yourself back in the dark. Your baby stirs. Before the stir becomes a cry, it is already at the breast, because the distance between the two bodies is 0, which raises the obvious test. If constant carrying and instant answering is what shrinks a cry, would that work on a modern baby? Or is it something about those babies, those genes, that desert? Barr ran the experiment. In 1986, working with Urs Hunziker in Montreal, he took 99 mother-infant pairs and randomly split them into 2 groups. One group was asked to carry their babies more throughout the day, not in response to crying, not during feeding, just more carrying on top of everything they already did. The other group carried on as normal. At 6 weeks, the peak of the crying curve, the babies who got the extra carrying cried and fussed 43% less. In the evening hours, the notorious stretch between 4 o'clock and midnight, they cried 51% less. Not a cultural quirk, not a Kalahari gene, a lever, and it worked in a Canadian city. And yet the experiment could only ever reproduce half the ancient answer. Because you can hand a mother a sling, you cannot hand her a camp. Now for the part that reframes everything. Go back to the question you were left holding. Why is the human cry so loud in the first place? Ronald Barr named this the early crying paradox. In a world of predators, a signal that carries hundreds of meters and peaks precisely when the infant is at its most helpless looks like a design flaw so severe it should have been erased. Unless the cry was never designed to travel that far. There's a distinction in mammal biology, laid out by the pediatricians Betsy Lozoff and Gary Brittenham, between animals that cache their young and animals that carry them. A cache species, like a deer or a rabbit, hides the infant, leaves, and returns hours later. That infant is built for absence. Its mother's milk is thick and rich, loaded with fat and protein, engineered to hold a stomach for a long time. And the infant is silent, because silence is what keeps it alive. Carrying species do the opposite. The infant rides on the body. It feeds constantly, in small amounts, and the milk matches. Thin, watery, low in fat. Human milk is the milk of a carrying species. Your body is still manufacturing a fluid designed to be delivered every 13 minutes to an infant that never leaves your skin, which means the human cry evolved with a specific assumption baked into it. Not that it would be heard across a valley, that it would be answered in seconds by a body already touching it, or by one of 6 other people sitting around the same fire. The cry is not a scream into the dark, it is a tap on the shoulder. It only becomes a scream when nobody's shoulder is there. And you can watch the moment in history where that changed. The anthropologist Barry Hewlett compared infants of the Aka, who forage in the Central African rainforest, with infants of the Ngandu, farmers living right beside them. Same region, same climate, different way of life. The foragers' babies cried and fussed noticeably less. And among the farmers, a bout of crying that got no response at all from anyone was 3 times as common. Not modern life, not screens or cities or formula. Settling down was enough. The moment adults had fields to work and houses to be inside, and work that could not be done with an infant on the hip, the answering slowed, and the crying grew. Sarah Hurdy, the anthropologist who spent a career arguing that human beings are cooperative breeders, a species that raises its young collectively, not in isolated pairs, put the conclusion plainly. A human mother alone with a human infant is not the natural state. It's the deviation. So if you have ever stood in a dark hallway at 3 a.m. with a screaming newborn, convinced that something is wrong with the baby, or that something is wrong with you, look at the numbers again. Your baby is not crying more often than a baby in the Kalahari. It's crying for longer. Because in that camp, the average distance from a crying infant to the next pair of hands was a few feet, and there were 8 of them. In your house, at 3 a.m, there is one. A baby screams in the dark, and every instinct in it is calling, correctly, for a village that is no longer standing there, which is why the loneliest sound in a modern home is not the crying. It's the silence around it.